The stagecoach door swung open, and Katherine Langley stumbled out into the blinding Dakota sun. Her dress torn at the hem and dust, covering every inch of the faded blue fabric that had once been her Sunday best. She stood in the middle of Lead, South Dakota, in the summer of 1878, with no money, no family, and nowhere to go, watching the stagecoach disappear down the rutted street in a cloud of dust while the other passengers continued their journey west without her. She had been forced off when she could not pay the remaining fare. The driver had taken pity enough to let her reach this mining town rather than abandoning her on the empty prairie, but his charity ended there. Katherine wrapped her arms around herself despite the heat, feeling the weight of every stare from the miners and merchants who lined the wooden sidewalks of the main street. At 22 years old, she had left St. Louis 3 weeks ago with hope and savings, planning to meet her intended fiancé in Deadwood. But thieves on the trail had taken everything except the clothes she wore and her stubborn determination to survive. Her stomach growled audibly, reminding her she had not eaten since yesterday morning. The buildings around her seemed to shimmer in the heat, false-fronted establishments promising everything from whiskey to supplies to salvation. She needed to find work immediately, but the way men looked at her made it clear what kind of work a woman alone might be expected to do in a rough mining town. "You look lost, miss." The voice came from behind her, deep and steady. Katherine turned to find a man standing in the shade of an awning, leading a chestnut horse by the reins. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes were an unusual shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds over water, and they regarded her with curiosity rather than the predatory interest she had seen from the others. He wore dusty work clothes, leather chaps over denim pants, and a worn hat pushed back on his head. "I am lost," she admitted, seeing no point in pretending otherwise. "The stage left me here without funds." He studied her for a moment, and Katherine forced herself to stand straight despite her exhaustion. She would not beg, even if she starved. "You have the look of someone who ran into trouble on the trail," he said. "Thieves?" She nodded. "They took my bags, my money, everything but what I am wearing." The man tied his horse to a post and stepped closer, though he maintained a respectful distance. "My name is Thomas Jefferson. I run a ranch about 8 miles north of here. I came into town for supplies." He paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. "I need help at the ranch. My last housekeeper left to get married 2 months ago, and the place is in desperate need of a woman's touch. I can offer you room, board, and fair wages in exchange for cooking, cleaning, and helping maintain the household." Katherine felt a flash of suspicion. Why would you offer work to a complete stranger? Thomas met her eyes directly. "Because I remember what it is like to have nothing. And because you look honest, which is more than I can say for most people I meet in this town." He gestured toward the street. "You have other options, I suppose, but I can promise you honest work and respectful treatment. No other expectations." She weighed his words, searching his face for signs of deception. His expression remained open, patient. The alternative was to try her luck and lead, and she had already seen enough to know that path led nowhere good. "I can cook and clean," she said. "I ran my father's household for 6 years before he died. I am not afraid of hard work." "I did not think you were." Something that might have been respect flickered in his eyes. "We can get you settled today if you are willing. I have a few more supplies to collect, then we can head out to the ranch before dark." "I have no belongings to pack," Katherine said, trying to keep the bitterness from her voice. "I am ready when you are." Thomas nodded and gestured toward the general store across the street. "Come with me. You will need a few things before we head out." Katherine followed him into the dim interior of the mercantile, where the air smelled of coffee, leather, and tobacco. Thomas spoke to the proprietor, a balding man with suspicious eyes, and began selecting items from the shelves. He picked out a simple cotton dress, a shawl, sturdy boots, and various toiletries, piling them on the counter. "I cannot pay you back," Katherine said quietly, embarrassment heating her cheeks. "Consider it an advance on your wages," Thomas replied without looking at her. "You cannot work in torn clothes, and you will need boots for the ranch. The terrain is rough." He paid for everything without haggling, which told Katherine he was a man of some means, then gathered the supplies he needed for the ranch while she changed into the new dress in a back room the proprietor's wife showed her. The dress was plain brown calico, but it fit well enough and was whole, which made it feel like luxury after 3 weeks in her ruined traveling clothes. When she emerged, Thomas had loaded everything onto a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 draft horses. His saddle horse was tied to the back. He helped her onto the wagon seat, his hand firm and steady on her elbow, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. They left Lead heading north, following a trail that wound through pine-covered hills. The black hills rose around them, dark green against the brilliant blue sky. Katherine had heard these hills were sacred to the Dakota people, and that the recent gold rush had broken treaties and brought violence to the region. Looking at the scarred hillsides where mining operations had torn into the earth, she felt a pang of sorrow for what had been destroyed in the name of gold. "The ranch belonged to my father," Thomas said, breaking the silence. "He came out here in '73, before the gold rush really took hold. He wanted cattle land, not gold. He died 2 years ago, left everything to me. I was working on a ranch in Wyoming at the time." "I am sorry about your father," Katherine said. "He was a good man. Taught me everything I know about ranching." Thomas kept his eyes on the trail. "What brought you to Dakota territory?" Katherine hesitated, then decided honesty was better than invention. "I was engaged to a man in Deadwood. We had been corresponding for a year. He sent money for my passage from St. Louis after my father died and left me with nothing but debts. But the thieves took everything, including his letters with his address. I do not even know how to find him now. What is his name? Deadwood is not that big, I might know him. Charles Morrison." "He said he ran a freight business." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "I knew a Charles Morrison. Big fellow, red beard." Hope flared in Katherine's chest. "Yes, that sounds right. He left Deadwood 3 months ago. Word is he owed money all over town and skipped out to California." Thomas glanced at her, sympathy in his expression. "I am sorry." The hope died as quickly as it had sparked. Katherine stared at her hands folded in her lap. She had built her entire future on Charles Morrison's promises, and now she was stranded in a territory she had never intended to stay in, dependent on the charity of a stranger. "Then I suppose it is fortunate you needed a housekeeper," she said, proud that her voice remained steady. "I suppose it is," Thomas agreed quietly. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon creaking and rattling over the rough trail. The sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the hills in shades of gold and amber. Despite everything, Katherine found herself struck by the wild beauty of the landscape. She had never seen anything like these hills, so different from the gentle Missouri countryside she had known all her life. "The ranch is just over this rise," Thomas said as they crested a hill. Katherine looked down into a valley where a collection of buildings nestled beside a stream lined with cottonwood trees. The main house was a solid log structure with a stone chimney and a covered porch. Nearby stood a large barn, a corral with several horses, and various outbuildings. Cattle dotted the valley, grazing peacefully in the evening light. It was modest but well-maintained, the kind of place that spoke of honest work and careful stewardship. "It is beautiful," Katherine said, surprised by how much she meant it. Thomas looked at her, something warming in his expression. "I think so, though I admit it needs work. The house especially has been neglected since my father's housekeeper left." As they descended into the valley, Katherine saw he had not exaggerated. The porch sagged slightly. Weeds had overtaken what must have once been a garden, and through the windows she could see dust and disorder. But the bones of the place were good, solid. It reminded her of her father's house before it had been sold to pay his debts, back when she had taken pride in keeping everything in perfect order. Thomas helped her down from the wagon and led her inside. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace at one end and a cast iron stove at the other. A thick layer of dust covered everything, dirty dishes were piled in the basin, and cobwebs stretched across the corners. But the furniture was well made, the windows were intact, and she could see the potential beneath the neglect. "Your room is through here," Thomas said, leading her to a small bedroom off the main room. It held a simple bed with a decent mattress, a dresser, and a washstand. "It is not much, but it is private and the roof does not leak." "It is more than I had this morning," Katherine said honestly. "Thank you, Mr. Jefferson. Just Thomas, please. We are going to be sharing a house, no point in being formal." He set her new belongings on the dresser. "My room is upstairs in the loft. You will have this whole area to yourself. I will bring in some water so you can wash up. Then I will show you where everything is, and we can figure out supper." He was true to his word, giving her privacy to wash away the dust and exhaustion of travel before showing her the kitchen stores. She found flour, cornmeal, beans, salt pork, and various tinned goods, enough to work with. Despite her weariness, she felt her spirits lift as she began to organize the kitchen. This, at least, was familiar territory. "How long has it been since you had a proper meal?" she asked, surveying the meager supplies. Thomas looked slightly embarrassed. "Define proper." "Something that is not beans and salt pork fried in a pan." "Then about 2 months." Katherine shook her head but could not quite suppress a smile. "Then you hired me just in time. Sit down, this will not take long." She worked quickly, her hands remembering the rhythm she had learned years ago in her father's kitchen. She made cornbread from scratch, soaked and fried the salt pork until it was crispy, and opened a tin of tomatoes to simmer with onions she found in the cellar. It was simple food, but properly prepared, and the smell filled the house with a warmth that had been missing. Thomas watched her work, not speaking, but she felt his attention like a physical presence. When she served the meal, setting a plate in front of him with more care than the simple food required, he looked at it as though she had given him something precious. "I have not had cornbread like this since my mother died," he said quietly. "Thank you, Katherine." "Just Kate, please," she replied, echoing his earlier words. "And you are welcome." They ate in companionable silence, both too hungry and tired for much conversation. After the meal, Katherine insisted on cleaning up despite Thomas's protests that it could wait until morning. She needed to do this, needed to feel useful and establish her place in this household that had become her unexpected refuge. When she finally retired to her small room, she lay on the bed and stared at the rough-hewn ceiling beams, trying to process the strangeness of the day. This morning she had been desperate and alone in a strange town. Tonight she had a roof over her head, food in her belly, and honest work ahead of her. And she owed it all to a man she had known for less than 12 hours, a man whose quiet kindness had been like water to someone dying of thirst. She thought about Thomas, about the careful way he had treated her, the respect in his voice, the loneliness she had sensed beneath his capable exterior. He was perhaps 4 or 5 years older than her, she guessed, old enough to have learned hard lessons but young enough to still hope for better things. She wondered what his story was, what had brought him back to this isolated valley to run a ranch alone. Sleep took her before she could pursue the thought further, pulling her into dreams of open spaces and storm-gray eyes. The rooster woke her before dawn, and Katherine rose immediately, dressing quickly in her new clothes. She found Thomas already outside, having returned from checking on the livestock. He looked surprised to see her up so early. "I thought you might sleep in after yesterday," he said. "Ranches do not run on city hours," Katherine replied. "Neither do I. Coffee will be ready in a few minutes." She fell into a routine more easily than she had expected. The work was hard, harder than anything she had done in St. Louis, but it felt honest in a way her old life never had. She cleaned the house from top to bottom, scrubbing away months of bachelor neglect. She planted a new garden, coaxing seeds into the Dakota soil and watering them faithfully from the stream. She learned to bake bread in the temperamental cast iron stove, to churn butter, to preserve vegetables and meat for the winter ahead. Thomas worked from dawn until dusk, tending the cattle, mending fences, breaking horses. He was unfailingly courteous but maintained a careful distance, never stepping into her space uninvited, never presuming on their living arrangement. In the evenings, they would eat together and talk about the day's work, but he always withdrew to his loft afterward, leaving her the main floor to herself. Weeks passed this way, settling into a rhythm that felt almost peaceful. Katherine found herself watching Thomas when he did not know she was looking, noticing the way he moved with easy confidence, the gentleness in his hands when he worked with the horses, the quiet humor that emerged when he was relaxed. She learned that he loved this land with a fierce devotion, that he read books in the evening when work was done, that he had a beautiful singing voice he only used when he thought no one was listening. And she learned that he was lonely. It was there in the way his face lit up when she brought lunch out to wherever he was working, in the way he lingered over supper, reluctant to end their conversations, in the careful way he treated the small comforts she brought to the house, as though they were treasures beyond price. She was lonely too, she realized. Lonely in a way that had nothing to do with solitude and everything to do with the careful distance they both maintained. Because somewhere in those weeks of working beside each other, of sharing meals and conversation, of building something together in this isolated valley, she had started to fall in love with Thomas Jefferson. It terrified her. She was living in his house, dependent on him for her survival. She could not risk jeopardizing this arrangement by revealing feelings that might not be returned. Charles Morrison's betrayal was still fresh enough to make her wary of trusting her heart to any man. So she kept her feelings locked away and focused on her work. But the heart has its own wisdom, and it was growing harder to ignore. One evening in late September, as the first hints of autumn colored the air, Katherine was preparing supper when she heard a commotion from the yard. She looked out to see Thomas running toward the barn, and then she heard it, the unmistakable sound of a horse in distress. She hurried outside and found Thomas in one of the stalls with his favorite mare, a beautiful bay named Sadie who was heavy with foal. The horse was down, thrashing, her sides heaving with labored breaths. "Something is wrong," Thomas said, his voice tight with worry. "The foal is coming wrong, I can tell." Katherine had helped with difficult births on her uncle's farm when she was younger. She rolled up her sleeves and knelt beside him. "Let me see." Together they worked through the long night, sweat and blood and fear mingling in the close air of the barn. Katherine talked soothingly to the mare while Thomas worked with steady hands to turn the foal. It was delicate, dangerous work, and she saw the strain in every line of his body, the desperate determination to save both animals. Finally, just as dawn was breaking, the foal slipped free, alive and kicking. Sadie lifted her head, exhausted but alert, and began to nuzzle her baby. Thomas sat back on his heels, relief washing over his face. "You saved them," Katherine said softly. "We saved them," he corrected, looking at her. "I could not have done it without you." They were both filthy, covered in straw and worse, but in that moment Katherine did not care. She saw something shift in Thomas's expression, a barrier finally crumbling. He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle. "Kate," he said, and her name on his lips was like a prayer. "These last few months, having you here, they have been the happiest I can remember. This place, it was just a ranch before. Now it feels like a home, because of you," her heart hammered in her chest. "Thomas, I need to tell you something. I am not staying just because I need the work. I am staying because I want to be here, with you." His hand cupped her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "I was afraid to say anything, afraid you would feel obligated because of the circumstances. But Kate, I have been in love with you since the day you made that first supper and looked at me like I was worth feeding properly." "That is a low bar for falling in love," she said, but her voice trembled with emotion. "Maybe, but everything after just made it worse. Better. Both." He laughed, a sound of pure joy. "I am making a mess of this. What I mean is, I love you. Not as my housekeeper, not as someone I took in out of charity. I love you, Katherine Langley, for exactly who you are." She closed the distance between them and kissed him, tasting salt and sweat and the sweet promise of something she had stopped believing in. His arms came around her, strong and sure, and she felt something inside her finally settle into place, like coming home after a long journey. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were grinning like fools. "We should probably clean up," Thomas said. "We smell like the back end of a barn." "We smell like life," Katherine corrected. "But yes, we should definitely clean up." They walked back to the house hand in hand, watching the sun rise over the Black Hills and paint everything gold. The future, which had seemed so uncertain and frightening just months ago, now stretched before Katherine, full of possibility. She had arrived in Dakota territory with nothing but the clothes she wore, running from a broken promise toward an uncertain fate. But Thomas had been right that first day in lead. He did have everything they needed right here: land and water, shelter and food, work worth doing, and a love worth keeping. Everything else was just details to be figured out together. The next few weeks were a revelation. With their feelings finally acknowledged, the careful distance that had characterized their relationship dissolved into easy affection. Thomas found excuses to be near the house more often, teaching Katherine to ride properly so she could explore the ranch with him. She found herself touching him constantly, small gestures of affection that spoke of growing intimacy. A hand on his shoulder as she set down his coffee, her fingers brushing his as they passed tools back and forth, stolen kisses in the barn when the workday was done. They talked for hours, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for their future. Katherine learned that Thomas's mother had died when he was 12, leaving him to be raised by his father on various ranches throughout the West. He had learned his trade from hard experience, working his way up from stable hand to ranch manager before inheriting his father's property. He had been alone for so long that he had almost forgotten what it was like to share his life with someone. She told him about growing up in St. Louis, about the careful gentility of her mother's social ambitions, and the quiet disappointment when her father's business ventures failed one by one. She told him about nursing her father through his final illness, about the debts that had consumed everything, about the desperation that had driven her to accept Charles Morrison's proposal despite her reservations. "I think part of me knew it was too good to be true," she admitted one evening as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. A successful businessman who wanted to marry a penniless woman he had never met. But I needed to believe in something. I needed to believe there was a future for me somewhere. "There is a future for you," Thomas said, pulling her closer against his side. "Here with me if you want it." "I want it," she said, "more than I have ever wanted anything." October brought the first snow, dusting the hills with white and reminding them that winter was coming. They worked together to prepare the ranch, cutting wood, storing hay, reinforcing the outbuildings against the harsh weather ahead. Katherine learned that winter in Dakota Territory was not like winter in Missouri. The cold here was brutal, the snow measured in feet rather than inches, and survival required careful planning and constant vigilance. But she also learned that winter on the ranch could be beautiful. When a blizzard trapped them inside for 3 days, they spent the time in warm contentment, reading by the fire, cooking elaborate meals just because they could, talking and laughing and stealing kisses in the firelight. Thomas taught her to play chess, and she taught him the card games her father had loved. They were creating their own world within these log walls, a private universe where nothing existed but the two of them and the love growing between them. On a clear day in early November, Thomas rode into Lead and returned with a small wooden box. He found Katherine in the kitchen, up to her elbows in bread dough, and set the box on the table. "Open it," he said, and there was a nervousness in his voice she had never heard before. Katherine wiped her hands and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of cotton, was a simple gold ring set with a small diamond that caught the light like a captured star. "It was my mother's," Thomas said. "The only thing of hers my father kept. He gave it to me before he died and told me to save it for someone worthy of it. Kate, you are more than worthy. You are everything I never knew I was looking for." He took her flour-dusted hands in his. "I know we have not known each other long. I know the circumstances that brought you here were not ideal, but these past few months have shown me what my life could be, what it should be. I do not want to go back to the way things were before. I do not want to be alone anymore. Katherine Langley, will you marry me?" She did not hesitate. "Yes, yes, Thomas, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger where it fit perfectly, as though it had been waiting for her all along. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her with a passion that made her forget about the bread dough and everything else except the feeling of being exactly where she belonged. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Lead. Thomas's neighbor ranchers came, along with a few townspeople who had grown to respect the quiet young man with the successful ranch. Katherine wore a new dress of deep blue wool, the finest thing she had owned since leaving St. Louis, and carried wildflowers that Thomas had somehow found despite the approaching winter. The preacher was a stern-faced man named Reverend Miller who clearly disapproved of quick courtships, but his expression softened when he saw the way Thomas and Katherine looked at each other. When he pronounced them man and wife and Thomas kissed his bride, there was a rightness to it that no one could deny. They held a small celebration at the ranch that afternoon. The neighbor ranchers brought their families, and Katherine found herself welcomed into a community she had not realized existed. These were hard people, weathered by the brutal landscape and the constant struggle to survive, but they were also kind, quick to offer help and friendship to those who proved themselves trustworthy. Martha Thornton, the wife of the nearest rancher, pulled Katherine aside at one point. She was a sturdy woman in her 40s with kind eyes and work-worn hands. "That man of yours, he is a good one," she said. "We were worried about him, living out here all alone, It is not healthy for a person to be that isolated, but you have brought him back to life. We can all see it." "He saved my life," Katherine said simply. "I arrived here with nothing, and he gave me everything." "And you gave him everything right back," Martha replied. "That is how the best marriages work. You take care of each other, and somehow that makes you both stronger than you ever were alone." As the sun set and their guests departed, Katherine found herself standing on the porch with her new husband, watching the last wagon disappear down the trail. Thomas wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. "Cold?" he asked. "Not anymore." He turned her to face him, his eyes serious. "I want you to know something. This house, this ranch, everything I have, it is ours now, not mine. Ours. I am going to go into lead next week and have the deed changed to both our names. Whatever happens, you will always have a home here. You will always be secure." Tears pricked Katherine's eyes. He was giving her what Charles Morrison's broken promises had taken away: security, stability, a place in the world that could not be stolen. But more than that, he was giving her his trust, his partnership, his whole heart. "I love you," she whispered. "I did not think I would ever say those words and mean them completely, but I do. I love you, Thomas Jefferson, with everything I am." "I love you too," he said, "now and always." He swept her into his arms and carried her over the threshold, into the house that was now truly their home. The fire burned warm on the hearth. The smell of the wedding supper still lingered in the air, and outside the first real snow of winter began to fall, blanketing the world in white. But inside they had everything they needed: each other, a love hard-won and freely given, and a future that stretched before them bright with promise. That night, as Katherine lay beside her husband in the bed they now shared, she thought about the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. If the thieves had not taken her money, if Charles Morrison had been an honest man, if the stagecoach had not left her stranded in Lead, she would never have met Thomas. She would never have found this life, this love, this sense of finally belonging somewhere completely. Perhaps, she thought as sleep claimed her, there was a kind of providence in disaster. Perhaps sometimes you had to lose everything to find what you truly needed. Winter settled over the ranch with a vengeance, bringing temperatures that made Katherine's bones ache and snow that drifted high against the buildings. But inside the house, warmth and happiness reigned. Thomas proved to be an attentive and affectionate husband, always ready with a smile or a kiss, quick to help with the household tasks, despite the heavy demands of keeping the ranch running in such brutal weather. They developed a routine that suited them both. Thomas would wake before dawn to tend the animals, then return for the breakfast Katherine had prepared. They would work through the day at their separate tasks, but always found reasons to come together. A shared pot of coffee in the morning, lunch eaten side by side, stolen moments in the barn where Thomas would pull her into his arms and kiss her until they were both breathless. Evenings were their favorite time. After supper, they would sit by the fire, Katherine mending or knitting while Thomas read aloud from books or newspapers he bought in Lead. Sometimes he would tell her stories of his years working on other ranches, adventures and misadventures that made her laugh. Sometimes they would simply sit in comfortable silence, content to be together. On Christmas Eve, Katherine presented Thomas with a new shirt she had sewn in secret, made from fabric she had purchased with her carefully saved wages. He gave her a music box he had ordered from a catalog, a delicate thing that played a waltz when wound. They danced together in the firelight to the tinkling melody, and Katherine felt her heart so full she thought it might burst. "This is the first real Christmas I have had since my mother died," Thomas said softly as they swayed together. "Thank you for that. We will have many more," Katherine promised, a lifetime of them. Winter finally loosened its grip in March, and spring came to the Black Hills in a rush of melting snow and budding trees. Katherine discovered she was with child in early April, and Thomas's joy was so profound it brought tears to her eyes. He became impossibly protective, insisting she rest more, hovering anxiously whenever she lifted anything heavier than a dish towel. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she protested laughingly one day when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. "I know, but you are carrying something precious." "My child, our child. Let me worry about you. It makes me feel useful." She kissed him and relented, touched by his concern even as she rolled her eyes at his overprotectiveness. The truth was, she had never felt stronger or more alive. Her body was changing, growing round with the new life inside her, and every flutter and kick was a reminder of the miracle they had created together. Summer brought long days of hard work as they expanded the ranch. Thomas hired 2 hands to help with the cattle, young men named Peter and Sam who were respectful and hardworking. Katherine enjoyed having more people around, cooking for them and occasionally joining their conversations during meals. The ranch felt less isolated with the addition of their help, more like a real community. In late July, Martha Thornton came to stay at the ranch as Katherine's time drew near. Thomas had ridden to the Thornton place himself to ask, and Martha had agreed immediately, bringing her experience as a midwife and her calm, capable presence. Katherine was grateful for another woman's company, especially one as knowledgeable as Martha. The baby came on a sweltering night in early August. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Katherine thought she could not endure another pain. But Thomas stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, whispering encouragement and love. And Martha guided her through it all with steady confidence. When their son finally emerged, red-faced and squalling, Thomas wept openly. He held the baby with such tender reverence that Katherine fell in love with him all over again. This man, this cowboy who had taken her in when she had nothing, was now the father of her child, and the sight of him cradling their son filled her with a joy so profound it bordered on pain. They named him James Edward Jefferson, after both their fathers. Jamie, they called him, and he became the center of their world. Thomas proved to be a devoted father, rising in the night to walk with the fussy baby, singing him lullabies in his beautiful voice, staring at the tiny face for hours as though memorizing every feature. "I never thought I would have this," he told Katherine one night as they watched Jamie sleep in the cradle Thomas had built with his own hands. "A family. A real family. Sometimes I have to remind myself this is real, that you are really here, that this is really my life now." "It is real," Katherine assured him. "This is your life, our life, and it is only going to get better." She was right. The ranch prospered over the next few years, growing from a modest operation to one of the most successful spreads in the area. Thomas proved to have a gift for breeding quality horses, and their stock became sought after throughout the territory. Katherine managed the household and the finances, her careful bookkeeping ensuring they saved money and invested wisely. Jamie grew into a sturdy, happy child with his father's gray-blue eyes and his mother's stubborn determination. He toddled after Thomas whenever possible, mimicking his father's walk and trying to help with the ranch work. By the time he was 3, he was already showing signs of his father's way with animals, gentle and intuitive in his handling of even the most skittish creatures. In the spring of 1882, Katherine discovered she was expecting again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, or perhaps because she was stronger now, toughened by years of ranch life. Thomas was just as protective but had learned to channel his worry into practical help rather than hovering. Their daughter was born on a crisp October morning, arriving so quickly that Martha barely made it in time. She had Catherine's dark hair and Thomas's features, a beautiful baby girl they named Sarah Grace. Jamie was fascinated by his new sister, wanting to hold her and help care for her, and Catherine's heart swelled watching her little family together. Life settled into a new rhythm. The ranch continued to thrive, and Thomas's reputation as a fair dealer and skilled rancher spread throughout the territory. They added a proper addition to the house, giving the children their own room and expanding the kitchen. They built a schoolhouse on the property and hired a teacher to come twice a week to instruct not just their own children but the children of their ranch hands and neighboring families. Katherine had found her calling in this, building not just a home but a community. She organized social gatherings, helped new families settling in the area, offered assistance to women struggling with the harsh realities of frontier life. She remembered her own arrival, desperate and alone, and she was determined that no one else would feel that way if she could help it. One evening in the summer of 1885, as they sat on the porch watching Jamie and Sarah play in the yard, Thomas took Catherine's hand. "You remember what I said to you that first day in Lead?" he asked. "When you told me you had lost everything." "You said you had everything we needed right here," Katherine replied. "At the time, I thought you were either crazy or incredibly arrogant," he laughed. "I was a little of both, probably, but I meant it. I knew the land could provide for us. What I did not know was how much more than just survival we would build together. You have given me a life beyond anything I imagined. A home, a family, a future worth living for." "We gave each other that," Katherine corrected. "I arrived here with nothing but the clothes I wore and a broken heart. You helped me see that having nothing could be a beginning rather than an ending. We built this life together, Thomas, every bit of it." He pulled her close, kissing her temple. "I love you more every day. I did not think that was possible, but it is. After all these years, you still surprise me." "Good," she said, smiling. "I would hate to become predictable." Jamie called out then, having caught a frog he wanted to show them, and they rose to admire his prize. Sarah toddled over, wanting to see too, and Thomas scooped her up onto his shoulders so she could get a better view. Katherine watched her family together, backlit by the setting sun, and felt contentment settle over her like a warm blanket. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. Harsh winters and dry summers, sick cattle and broken fences, the constant work that ranch life demanded. But also birthdays and holidays, first words and first steps, laughter and love, and the deep satisfaction of building something lasting together. In 1888, Katherine gave birth to twin boys, Daniel and Robert, who arrived healthy and loud and full of energy. Thomas joked that they were going to need to expand the house again, but his smile was wide as he said it. Jamie and Sarah doted on their baby brothers, and the house rang with children's voices and the chaos of a growing family. The ranch hands came and went over the years, but some stayed, becoming part of the extended family that the ranch represented. Peter married a girl from town and brought her to live in one of the cottages they had built for married workers. Sam eventually started his own small ranch on the property, land that Thomas sold to him at a fair price with generous terms. The community Katherine had envisioned was becoming reality, a place where people could build lives and support each other through the harsh demands of frontier existence. Lead and Deadwood continued to boom with gold money, but the Jeffersons had something more valuable than gold: land that could sustain them for generations, children to inherit it, and a love that had weathered every storm and only grown stronger. They had built something real and lasting in this wild territory, something that would endure long after the gold veins played out and the miners moved on to the next strike. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Thomas surprised Katherine with a trip to lead for dinner at the hotel, their first night away from the ranch since Sarah's birth. They dressed in their best clothes, Thomas in a new suit and Katherine in a beautiful emerald dress he had bought for her in secret, and rode into town feeling like newlyweds again. Over dinner, Thomas presented her with a small portrait he had commissioned, showing the two of them with all 4 children. It had been painted from a photograph taken the previous summer, and the artist had captured something essential about each of them. Thomas's quiet strength, Katherine's warm smile, Jamie's serious expression, Sarah's mischievous grin, the twins' matching looks of wonder. "So we will remember," Thomas said. "These years, this time when the children are young and our life is exactly what we wanted it to be, I want to remember every moment." Katherine traced the frame with her finger, tears threatening. "It is perfect. You are perfect. This life we have built is perfect." "Not perfect," Thomas said, taking her hand. "Perfect would be boring. But it is ours, and that makes it exactly right." They danced that night to a small band playing in the hotel ballroom, holding each other close and moving to music that seemed to play just for them. Katherine rested her head against Thomas's chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart, thinking about the journey that had brought them here. From strangers meeting in desperation to partners in every sense of the word, from a lonely cowboy and a stranded woman to husband and wife parents, builders of a legacy that would outlast them both. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me that day in lead. For offering me a chance when I had nowhere else to turn. For loving me." Thomas pulled back to look at her, his storm-gray eyes intense with emotion. "Kate, loving you is the easiest thing I have ever done. Everything good in my life came from the moment I decided to stop and talk to a scared woman standing in the street. You are my everything. You always will be." They kissed there in the middle of the ballroom, and Katherine felt the same flutter in her heart that she had felt that first time in the barn, when Thomas had finally told her he loved her. Some things, she realized, never changed. The chemistry between them, the connection that had sparked into being that first day and had only grown stronger with time, would endure as long as they both drew breath. The years rolled on. Jamie grew into a capable young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, already showing the leadership and skill that would make him an excellent rancher in his own right. Sarah developed a passion for horses, spending hours in the barn and the corrals, and proved to have her father's gift for training them. The twins were still young but showed signs of their own emerging personalities. Daniel quiet and thoughtful, Robert bold and adventurous. In 1892, on a warm spring evening, the family gathered on the porch to watch the sunset. It had become something of a tradition, this gathering at day's end to appreciate the beauty of the land they called home. Thomas sat in his favorite rocking chair with baby Robert on his lap, while Katherine sat beside him with Daniel. Jamie and Sarah sprawled on the porch steps, arguing good-naturedly about something that had happened during the day. Thomas looked around at his family, at the ranch stretching out before them green and prosperous, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. He thought about the man he had been 15 years ago, alone and isolated, going through the motions of life without truly living it. And he thought about the woman who had changed everything, who had arrived with nothing and given him the world. "What are you thinking about?" Katherine asked, noticing his expression. "Just that I am the luckiest man alive," he said. "And that I would do it all again, exactly the same way, just to end up right here, right now, with you and our children. Even the part where Sadie nearly died foaling," Jamie asked, having heard the story many times. Even that, Thomas confirmed. Because that was the night your mother and I finally admitted we loved each other. That was the night everything changed. Sarah made a face. You two are so sappy. Wait until you fall in love, Katherine said with a smile. Then you will understand. I am never falling in love, Sarah declared. I am going to raise horses and be independent. Thomas and Katherine shared an amused look. They had said similar things once, before fate had brought them together. As the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, Katherine leaned her head on Thomas's shoulder. The children's voices washed over them, the twins babbling baby talk, Jamie and Sarah still arguing, and beneath it all the constant sounds of the ranch. Cattle lowing, horses nickering, the wind rustling through the cottonwoods by the stream. This was wealth, Katherine thought. Not gold or money or possessions, but this, family and land, love and purpose, a life built together from nothing into something beautiful and enduring. She had arrived in Dakota territory with only the clothes she wore and a heart full of fear. Thomas had offered her everything she needed, and together they had created more than either of them had dreamed possible. I love you, she said quietly, for perhaps the 1,000th time, and meaning it more deeply than ever. I love you too, Thomas replied, his arm tightening around her. Always and forever. The years continued their steady march forward. Jamie married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread in 1895, a kind young woman named Elizabeth who fit into the family as though she had always belonged. They built a house on the far side of the property and started their own family, giving Thomas and Katherine their first grandchild in 1896, a boy they named Thomas after his grandfather. Sarah, despite her declarations of independence, fell in love with a horse trainer from Wyoming who came to the ranch to buy breeding stock. She married him in 1897 and moved to his ranch, though she visited often and stayed deeply involved in the family business. The twins grew into strapping young men, both choosing to stay on the ranch and work alongside their father and brother. As the new century dawned, Thomas and Katherine found themselves in their 40s, no longer young but far from old, their lives rich with children and grandchildren, and the fruits of decades of hard work. The ranch had become one of the most respected operations in the Black Hills, known for quality stock and fair dealing. The name Jefferson meant something in this part of the territory, now state after South Dakota's admission to the Union in 1889. Honesty, integrity, community. One autumn evening in 1900, Katherine sat on the porch with her knitting, watching Thomas work with a young horse in the corral. He moved with the same easy grace he had always possessed, though his hair was now shot through with silver, and his face bore the lines of a life lived outdoors in harsh conditions. She thought he had never looked more handsome. He caught her watching and grinned, that familiar expression that still made her heart skip a beat after more than 20 years of marriage. When he finished with the horse, he climbed the porch steps and dropped into the chair beside her with a satisfied sigh. That colt is going to be something special, he said. Reminds me of his sire. You say that about every horse, Katherine teased, because it is true every time. He reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers interlacing with hers in a gesture so familiar it was like breathing. Jamie wants to expand the breeding program, bring in some new stock from Kentucky. I think we should let him. He has good instincts. He learned from the best, Katherine said. But yes, I agree. It is time to let him take more control. We have spent our lives building this place. Let our children carry it forward. Thomas nodded slowly. I have been thinking the same thing. Maybe it is time for us to step back a little. Enjoy the fruits of our labor. Travel a bit if you want. See some of the places we always talked about visiting." Katherine set down her knitting and looked at him seriously. "Thomas Jefferson, are you saying you want to retire?" "Not retire," he said quickly. "I will never fully retire. This ranch is in my blood, but maybe step back from the day-to-day operations. Let the children run things while we supervise. Give us more time for each other." He squeezed her hand. "I have spent our whole marriage working from dawn to dusk. I would like to spend more time just being with you, enjoying what we have built together." She felt warmth bloom in her chest. After all these years, he could still surprise her with his thoughtfulness. "I would like that. I would like that very much." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the Black Hills they had called home for more than 2 decades. So much had changed since that day. Katherine had stumbled off the stagecoach in Lead, desperate and alone. But some things remained constant. The land, harsh and beautiful in equal measure, the work that never truly ended, and the love between them, tested by time and strengthened by shared struggles and triumphs. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you had gotten to Deadwood?" Thomas asked suddenly. If Charles Morrison had been there waiting for you, Katherine considered the question seriously. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but I think I would have been miserable with him, even if he had been honest. He was offering me security, but not love, not partnership, not this." She gestured at the ranch, at the life they had built. "I think maybe the thieves stealing my money was the best thing that ever happened to me. Remind me to thank them if I ever meet them," Thomas said dryly. Katherine laughed. "You know what I mean. Sometimes the worst things lead to the best outcomes. I lost everything, and because of that I found you. I found this life, this family. I found where I was meant to be all along. I have felt that way since the moment I saw you standing in that street," Thomas said. "Like I had been waiting for you without knowing it, like you were the piece that had been missing from my life. I took one look at you and thought, that woman needs help, but the truth is, I needed you just as much as you needed me. Maybe more." "We needed each other," Katherine said firmly. "That is how the best partnerships work. Equal need, equal benefit, equal love." Thomas lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles, a gesture of affection he had performed 1,000 times over the years. "Equal love," he agreed, "always and forever." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, they remained on the porch, unwilling to break the peaceful mood. This had been their place from the beginning, this porch where they had shared countless evenings and conversations, where they had watched their children grow and their grandchildren play, where they had weathered storms both literal and metaphorical. It felt right to be here now, reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment of contentment and completion. The sound of horses approaching broke the silence. Jamie rode up with Elizabeth and their children, coming for the family dinner Katherine had planned for that evening. More family members arrived over the next hour. Sarah and her husband from Wyoming, the twins with their respective wives, grandchildren of various ages spilling out of wagons and racing around the yard with shrieks of joy. Katherine orchestrated the chaos with the ease of long practice, directing people to tasks, settling disputes, ensuring everyone had enough to eat. The house filled with noise and laughter, exactly as she had always dreamed it would. Thomas presided over the dinner table, telling stories and teasing the grandchildren, his face alight with happiness. After the meal, as the younger generation cleaned up and the children played outside in the last of the twilight, the adults gathered on the porch. Jamie proposed a toast to his parents, thanking them for building the ranch and creating a legacy that would sustain the family for generations to come. "To Ma and Pa," he said, raising his glass, "who started with nothing and built everything." "To Ma and Pa," the others echoed. Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. "We did not start with nothing," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We started with each other. That was more than enough." Thomas pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "That is still all we need," he murmured. "Everything else is just bonus." The evening stretched on, full of music and stories, and the particular joy that comes from being surrounded by people you love who love you in return. As the night grew late and families began departing for their own homes, Katherine and Thomas stood on the porch waving goodbye, their arms around each other. When the last wagon had disappeared down the trail and silence had returned to the ranch, they went inside to their own room, the room they had shared for more than 20 years. The house felt simultaneously empty and full. Empty of the noise and chaos of the evening, but full of the memories and love that had accumulated over the decades. Katherine prepared for bed, brushing out her hair in front of the mirror. Thomas came up behind her and took the brush from her hand, running it gently through the dark strands that were now streaked with silver. "You are more beautiful now than the day I met you," he said softly. "You need spectacles," Katherine replied, but she was smiling. "I see perfectly clearly. I see a woman who has worked alongside me for more than 20 years, who has given me 4 children and helped me build a life worth living. I see strength and grace and a beauty that comes from living fully and loving deeply. That is what I see when I look at you." She turned and cupped his face in her hands. "I see the man who saved me when I needed saving, who loved me when I felt unlovable, who built a home and a family and a future with me. I see my partner, my best friend, the love of my life. That is what I see when I look at you." They kissed, a tender gesture that held within it all the passion and affection of more than 2 decades of marriage. Then they climbed into bed and held each other close, comfortable in the darkness, secure in the knowledge that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. The years continued to unfold with a gentle inevitability. Thomas gradually handed more and more responsibility to Jamie, though he remained involved in the daily operations of the ranch. He and Katherine took trips to places they had always wanted to see: Denver and San Francisco, even a journey back to St. Louis so Katherine could show him where she had grown up. But they always returned to the ranch with relief, recognizing that this valley in the Black Hills was their true home. More grandchildren arrived, and then great-grandchildren as Jamie's oldest children started families of their own. The family tree grew complex and beautiful, branches spreading in all directions but all rooted in the same soil, the same love, the same foundation that Thomas and Katherine had built together. In 1910, on a crisp autumn morning very similar to the one when they had first met 32 years earlier, Thomas and Katherine sat on their porch watching the sun rise. They were in their 60s now, slowed by age but still active, still engaged with the ranch and the family they had created. "Do you have any regrets?" Katherine asked suddenly. Thomas considered the question seriously. "I regret the years I spent alone before I met you. I wish I had found you sooner, but everything else," he shook his head, "no regrets. This life we have built, it is exactly what I hoped for and more than I deserved." "You deserved all of it," Katherine said firmly. "You deserved happiness and love and a family. You are a good man, Thomas Jefferson. You always have been." "Because you made me better," he replied. "You challenged me and supported me and loved me even when I was difficult. Everything good about me you brought out." "We brought out the best in each other," Katherine said. "That is what love does when it is the right love. It makes both people better, stronger, more fully themselves." They sat in silence for a while, comfortable with each other in the way only long married couples can be. The ranch spread out before them, green and prosperous even as winter approached. Smoke rose from the chimneys of the worker cottages, cattle grazed peacefully in the pastures, horses moved in the corrals. It was a living, thriving enterprise, and it would continue long after they were gone. "I love you," Thomas said, as he had said thousands of times over the years. "I love you too," Katherine replied, her response as constant as the sunrise. They remained on the porch until the sun was fully up, then went inside to begin another day. There was breakfast to make, grandchildren to visit, the endless small tasks that filled their days with meaning and purpose. But there was also time for each other, for long walks around the ranch they had built, for quiet conversations and shared memories, for appreciating the gift they had been given when fate brought them together in Lead, South Dakota, on a hot day in 1878. The seasons turned, as they always did. Winter snow gave way to spring rain, which gave way to summer heat, which gave way to autumn colors. The pattern repeated year after year, constant and comforting in its predictability. Thomas and Katherine grew older together, their faces lined with age and experience, their bodies slowed but their minds sharp, and their love undiminished. On their 40th wedding anniversary in November 1918, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration. Children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren filled every corner of the expanded house and spilled out into the yard. A professional photographer was hired to capture the moment, and the resulting picture showed Thomas and Katherine seated in the center, surrounded by more than 40 descendants, a testament to the life they had built together. At one point during the celebration, Katherine found herself alone in the kitchen for a moment, taking a brief respite from the happy chaos. She looked out the window at her family, at all the love and life that had sprung from the choice she and Thomas had made to build something together. She thought about the frightened, desperate woman who had stepped off that stagecoach 40 years ago, and she wished she could tell that woman that everything would be all right, that the best was yet to come. Thomas found her there and wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About beginnings," she said, "and about how grateful I am that mine led me to you." "Our beginning," he corrected gently. "We began together that day in Lead. Everything before was just prologue." She turned in his arms and kissed him, not caring if anyone saw, not caring about anything except expressing the depth of her love for this man who had given her everything when she had nothing. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "Come on," Thomas said, taking her hand. "Our family is waiting. Let us go celebrate what we have built together." They returned to the party hand in hand, and the celebration continued long into the evening. There was music and dancing, stories and laughter, the particular warmth that comes from being surrounded by people who share blood and history and love. As the night grew late, and the younger children began to fall asleep in corners, Katherine looked around at all the happy faces and felt a profound sense of completion. This was what she and Thomas had created from nothing. Not just a ranch, not just a family, but a legacy of love and hard work and commitment to each other, and to something larger than themselves. They had taken a chance on each other when the world seemed dark and uncertain, and from that chance had grown this beautiful, complex, precious thing. A family, a home, a life worth living. The years that followed were gentle ones. Thomas and Katherine settled into a comfortable retirement from active ranch management, though they remained involved and interested in every aspect of the operation. They spent their days doing exactly what they pleased: reading, walking, visiting with family, simply being together without the constant demands of work pressing on them. In the summer of 1922, as they sat on their porch watching a thunderstorm roll across the hills, Thomas reached over and took Catherine's hand. "I have been thinking," he said, "about that day we met, about what I said to you." "About having everything we needed?" Katherine asked. "Yes. I told you I had everything we needed right there at the ranch, and I believed it. I had land and water, shelter, and the means to make a living. I thought that was everything." He squeezed her hand gently. "But I was wrong. I did not have everything. I did not have you. And without you, all the rest of it was just survival, not living. You were what I needed, what we needed. You were the piece that made everything else matter." Katherine felt tears well up in her eyes. After all these years, he could still move her to tears with his words. "You were what I needed too," she said softly. "I arrived with nothing but the clothes I wore and a broken heart. You gave me shelter and work, yes. But more than that, you gave me hope. You gave me a reason to believe in good men and honest love. You gave me a home, not just a house. A future, not just survival. Everything worth having in my life came from meeting you." "Then we both got what we needed," Thomas said, pulling her close. "Each other. Everything else was just details." They sat together as the storm passed, watching lightning fork across the sky and rain sweep across the valley in silver sheets. The ranch would weather this storm as it had weathered countless others, because it was built on solid foundations. Good land, hard work, and most importantly, the love between two people who had found each other when they both needed finding. The storm cleared and a rainbow arched across the sky, brilliant and perfect. Katherine pointed to it and Thomas smiled. "A good sign," he said. "The best sign," she agreed. They remained on the porch until the sun emerged from behind the clouds, painting everything in golden light. The valley sparkled with raindrops, looking fresh and new and full of promise. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed and horses whinnied, the constant sounds of ranch life that had formed the background music to their entire marriage. "I would not change a single thing," Katherine said suddenly. "Not one moment, not one choice, not one hardship. Because all of it, every bit of it, led us here, to this life, this love. I would do it all again exactly the same way." "So would I," Thomas said, 1,000 times over. As the sun began its descent toward evening, they rose from their chairs and went inside to prepare supper. Their movements were synchronized after so many years together, each knowing instinctively where the other would be, what they would need, how to work together in the seamless partnership they had perfected over decades. After supper, they returned to the porch for one last look at the day before retiring for the night. The sky was ablaze with color, reds and oranges and purples painting the clouds in a spectacular display. It was the kind of sunset that made you believe in something larger than yourself, in beauty and purpose and the fundamental rightness of the world. "Thank you," Thomas said quietly. "For what?" "For saying yes. For taking a chance on me. For building this life with me. For loving me all these years." He turned to her, his eyes still that same storm gray that had caught her attention 44 years ago. "For everything, Kate. Thank you for everything." "Thank you for seeing me," she replied. "For stopping to help when you could have walked away. For offering me a chance when I had nowhere else to turn. For loving me when I felt unlovable. Thank you for being exactly who you are, Thomas Jefferson. You are the best man I have ever known." They kissed as the sun disappeared below the horizon, sealing promises made long ago and renewed every day since. Then they went inside to the home they had built together, secure in the knowledge that whatever time remained to them, they would spend it as they had spent the past 4 decades, together, in love, grateful for the gift they had been given when fate brought a desperate woman and a lonely cowboy together in a dusty mining town in the Black Hills of South Dakota. Their story was not one of grand adventure or dramatic excitement. It was something better. A story of two ordinary people who found extraordinary love in each other, who built something lasting from nothing, who proved that the greatest treasures are not found in gold mines but in the hearts of those we love and who love us in return. Katherine Langley had arrived in Dakota territory with nothing but the clothes she wore. Thomas Jefferson had offered her everything they needed right there at his ranch. And together, they had created a life that was richer than any gold strike, more valuable than any fortune, more enduring than any monument. They had created love and family and home. They had created everything that mattered, and that in the end was more than enough. It was everything.